Hello everybody, thank you for tuning in to this video. My name is David Higgins, and today I will be discussing the philosophy of evolution. Okay, I've been putting together a series on this book, which is called The Limits of Evolution and Other Essays. It's written by George Howison. You can find the book on Google Play or on used book search engine websites such as Bookfinder. It's an excellent metaphysical philosophy book. So everybody is familiar with the idea of evolution. It was first sort of put into mainstream consciousness through Charles Darwin. He observed that biological species will mutate and there will be changes over generations as is observed in plants and animals. Okay, and he coupled that with the idea of natural selection, so he was sort of theorizing what drove the phenomena of evolution, the phenomena of basically transmutation within a species. And natural selection is basically that random genetic variations will occur which alters any given individual's ability to survive, compete, and reproduce. And so as those adapted individuals have a greater success in the gene pool therefore reflects their success and the species changes. Okay, now that idea has basically changed and entered a lot of different areas in thought. It entered sociology and was called social Darwinism. So a given population will change over time, and when any particular individual in that population succeeds, they are more successful with reproductive activities, and so they basically survive and their offspring survive. So this idea was adapted by early capitalists who were looking for justification for their aggressive economic behavior, and it was also incidentally adopted by the Nazis. So, the survival of the fittest is, sort of a primitive idea of how humanity might interact and evolve. Certainly, economic competition affects things, but then there's other manner of relationship between individuals within the population that can also affect it. So it's not purely, change in human society is not purely driven by survival of the fittest. There's other factors involved. So although evolution obviously is a fact in human society, survival of the fittest as the driving inspiration behind evolution in human society isn't necessarily the case. So you can see how within a certain branch of knowledge evolution has application, but not necessarily the totality of the idea. It hasn't necessarily been proven to hold. So Howison challenges the notion that evolution can be applied cosmologically, or actually he doesn't necessarily deny it outright, but he says that we need to be very careful to discuss and carefully analyze whether or not evolution is in fact a seamless theory that can apply to metaphysical circumstances. So within metaphysics, there's typically two dominant ideas currently, and that would be materialism or physicalism, which is the idea that matter is the basis for all of reality, and even things like the human mind and various stages of consciousness are simply the product of the interaction of matter, maybe a biochemical process that gives rise to our mind. On the other hand, we have idealism, which says that we only can be sure that our experiences are validly existing, and so since these experiences have a subjective nature, meaning they occur within our consciousness, the only thing we can be sure that exists is our consciousness. And so many philosophers have analyzed this phenomena, and it has become a very credible metaphysical theory about the nature of reality, that it's basically based in human consciousness and entirely consists of human consciousness. Okay, so now, but both of these theories typically will embrace a certain monism, which means that typically philosophy in general is looking to find unity amongst all of phenomena, and call that unified experience reality in total. And so with unity being the goal, typically when we reach back with our minds and try to wrap our heads around the origin of reality, we want to believe that it basically all started from one point. And with the materialist, they usually will draw it back to the Big Bang, where we have this cloud of high density, high temperature gases that give rise to matter, and they boil it back a little bit further and call it energy. But a single source is typically where they start. And same thing with idealists. When they try to reduce the theory back to the origin, they will typically say, well, there's one mind or one consciousness that gave rise to all of reality, including the complexity which we now experience as the many conscious centers that is composed of the multitude of individuals in the universe. Okay, so Howison is going to analyze the phenomena of evolution and see if it can fit as a metaphysical philosophy. It rightfully is very solid when we look at the world in just a narrow set of parameters, which is basically biology, and then he wants to make sure that we're not making a mistake if we take it all the way into metaphysical reality and make it a universal idea. Okay, so evolutionism coupled with materialism typically will lead to, when we're going back to the source, it basically starts with, they basically become agnostics, where they say, well, we have a single starting point for the physical universe, but we don't really know where that came from. And they basically say, well, we're going to declare it unknowable and inscrutable because it's beyond phenomenal reality, and they basically just give up at that point. And as agnostics, they just say, well, we've reached the limit and we can't reach back any further. And then with idealism, they basically reach the same point, but they attribute it to a mind, but they don't really have the ability to give us more details about the nature of that mind. And so they just make sort of a transcendent spiritual omnipresent mind as their concept, which is the source of reality. And from that point, evolution is applied, and say, well, okay, so from that starting point, which is the unknowable energy behind materialism, or the unknowable transcendent mind behind idealism, then from there our individual consciousnesses arose and took shape through various mechanisms. Each has their own theories on that, but Howison objects, and he says that concept that our mind arose and evolved negates true individuality, and it in particular negates freedom, which he says is the basis of true individuality. Okay, so he's going to take a really close look at evolution and see how it shakes out. Okay, does it actually have cosmic reach? Can we extend, evolution throughout the whole range of phenomenal experience in the case of materialists? Because they say that the empirical reality, the phenomenon we experience, mostly through the five senses, but they also will be forced to acknowledge some inner senses, that maybe aren't just simply the five physical senses, but they acknowledge there are phenomena such as consciousness, but nevertheless that is still a phenomena, and it still comes from the physical reality that they claim is the overall basis. Okay, so we need to take a close look and see if evolution can be applied properly beyond just the narrow biological scientific field. Okay, so Howison is going to explain that there are 4 problems when we try to apply the theory of evolution, or the idea of evolution, to the entire scope of reality. The first limit of evolution, the first problem, arises when we are able to distinguish between something that is a phenomenal reality, something that appears to our senses, either our 5 physical senses, but will also grant that we have internal senses. So there's the phenomenal reality, that which we experience as a phenomena, and these things are typically framed by time and space, and then there's another type of reality which exists, which in the world of philosophy is called the noumenal level, which accounts for things that do have actual existence but only exist in reason. Okay, they're only present to reason, but they are in fact realities. Okay, so this is kind of a strange, complex idea, but evolution can't account for things like time, okay, because time is a reality, but it's only present to the mind. Okay, it's basically our ability to sequence the experiences that we have. Okay, so the actual sequencing we call time, and it's real, but it exists only to the reason. It doesn't exist to the senses, to physical things. It's associated with physical things, but it has basically restriction into an abstract reality. That's so the idea of time is not framed by time, which is a strange thing. But he goes through a pretty extensive development of the difference between phenomenal reality and noumenal noumenal reality. Okay, and so that's the first limit of evolution. It can't account for noumenal realities. Okay. So the next question he tackles is, can evolution be shown to be valid throughout the whole range of phenomenal experience? Okay. So we know that it applies to the organic biological realm, because evolution accounts for how species change across successive generations. But now we're challenged when we're looking at inorganic reality. So do we see evidence of evolution with solids and gases and chemicals and these sorts of things? There's obviously different levels of physical reality, so different levels of life. So when we're trying to use evolution as a metaphysical philosophy, we're trying to apply it to all of life. And because there's these jumps in the types of life that are manifest to our senses, such as solids, mineral solids, and gases, and various other physical things that don't have a biological element to them, but then suddenly we have the biological element added upon reality. So the building blocks of, say, a plant are the mineral elements there, but somehow there's a jump between purely mineral existence and plant existence, and evolution is unable to explain that jump. Okay, so that is what they typically say, something along the lines of, oh well, we're just going to call that spontaneous generation, from non-living physical phenomena to living physical phenomena. Something occurs called spontaneous generation, but they can't say what that is or how it happens. So there's a gap there when you try to apply evolution to all of phenomenal reality. Okay, so that's what he calls the second limit of evolution, the inability to extend from organic phenomena to inorganic phenomena. Okay, so there's a problem. And the next transition point that he addresses, which exposes the third gap when we try to apply evolution to all of reality, is the fact that there's another jump between living things which are not conscious and living things which are conscious. So there's a sharp transition from something having a mind back to where there was something that didn't have a mind. Okay, so a plant doesn't have a mind, but a human being does. And so there's another jump in the ascent of phenomena from simple to complex that evolution is unable to account for. They speculate that a certain magical biochemical reality transpires, and suddenly whatever it is thinking, but they have no explanation for it. So that's another problem with evolution. It can't cover that jump. That's the third limit, to go the ascent from the lower level of non-mind to the higher, more complex level of mind. So now the fourth limit that Howison points out is that at its root, and agnostic evolutionism just starts with what they call an omnipresent energy which can't be explained. And so metaphysical philosophy, in order to be complete or valid, really has to be able to have some sort of explanation, and the agnostics just say, well, it's inexplicable. And so Howison says, well, that's basically a fail. And so the concept of evolution in their desire to explain all of reality falls short on that part right there, that there's basically an initial inexplicability at its root, and that makes evolution not work. Okay, Howison has explained to us that there are 4 areas where the philosophy of evolutionism falls short. The first is its inability to account for the things in reality which have something other than a phenomenal existence. So the noumenal level of reality, evolution cannot account for. The level of reality that exists only to reason. Okay, so that's the first problem. The second problem is the gap that exists between inorganic reality and organic reality. It can't explain how, in its ascent, the phenomenal world takes, a jump between what is alive or not alive. So that's the second area. The third area is the jump that occurs between things that are possessing a mind and those which don't. So the jump between, say, the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom. In this case, they usually throw out the term spontaneous generation, that somehow the mind spontaneously occurs as we ascend in complexity. And the same thing can be said about their account of the jump between inorganic to organic, that life just spontaneously occurs, but they don't have an explanation for it exactly. And the fourth problem is that at its root, in particularly with the materialist, they can't explain what actually brought the physical or phenomenal world into existence. They have, basically they point to a term they call energy, but they can't account for the source of the energy. And so, as a metaphysical philosophy, it fails to explain the source of reality, and so that's problematic. Okay, so that's the end of part 1. And part 2, Howison addresses, idealism's understanding of the theory of evolution and its use as a metaphysical concept. And he shows that, idealism is more successful in its application of evolution, but he doesn't like it ultimately because of the fact that typical idealists point to a single transcendent mind as the source of reality, and his personal version of idealism includes multiple actual conscious centers. And so he's going to point out how personal idealism is much more effective in its use of the concept of evolution, and it's also more effective to justify the existence of actual human freedom and individual personality. So that's from about page 30 to page 50, and it's a lot to tackle, and it's pretty complicated, so I'm going to pause here and post this video, and maybe sometime next week I'll be able to get to the second half of Howison's essay on the limits of evolution. So thank you for watching, and I hope that this will edit into something sensible, and I hope you'll like and subscribe, and I hope you'll tune in for this part 2 of my explanation of Howison's ideas on the philosophy of evolution. Okay, have a great day.